And I really want to welcome everyone here on behalf of Employment First of Butler County. My name is Dale Tower. I'm the State Disability Employment Resource Coordinator for the Kansas Department of Commerce. But I'm also a resident of Butler County and proud to be a member of Employment First of Butler County. This is a coalition that we put together as we were looking back through our records. It was actually back in 2008. It was several, the same organizations plus more are still part of our group. But at the time, we came together just to consider doing a disability mentoring day in Butler County. And sure enough, the following year, we did a disability mentoring day. We didn't have any funding really to support it, so we recruited as we could. I think we had 15 participants, and we met right here at Butler. This building wasn't here at the time. It was one of the rooms over in one of the other buildings. And so, with that being said, we have someone here from Butler, Mr. Bill Rinkenbaugh, who's the Vice President of Student Services, to welcome us here today and offer a few comments.
That's pretty good when you get an applause before you say anything. Thank you. On behalf of the college, it is our privilege to host this event again this year. As Dale said, it started back in 2008 here. I think you were in the Kansas room over in the 1500 building.
Right.
Because this wasn't here. I am so impressed by the numbers of people that are here. I was telling Dale, 50 years, my youngest sister was born with Down syndrome. And she was born 50 years ago back in August. These kinds of resources that you all represent weren't available then. But Susan was born the youngest of 7 children, and her biggest advocate was my father. And I am convinced that Sue would not have had the successes that she's had this far in her life without that push, that support, going out in front and helping people understand what Susan's needs were, even with the schools. I mean, the schools were saying, we're not equipped for this, Floyd, and my dad says, you will be equipped for this because she's going to be here this August and you will teach her. And they did. And Sue was fortunate enough to be able to graduate from high school. She worked at a place in Coffeyville for a number of years. She's now in an assisted living place, living with my mother, who will be 95 in November, and those two are inseparable. So for what you do, thank you very much, and I hope you have a great day, and it's our pleasure at the college to host you, so have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. A little bit about Employment First of Butler County. In your packets, there's a write-up of our mission and vision. But like I said, we've been together about 11 years and hosted various events. The first one, of course, was Disability Mentoring Day, and back then the group, we simply called ourselves the DMD group. In subsequent years, there was a push that actually happened that Kansas became an employment first state. We were the first in the nation, this state was, to actually pass legislation. And so our group adopted the name Employment First of Butler County, and we've planned disability mentoring days for all those years. We've also planned transition fairs for students and parents from middle school all the way up through high school. And this is an event that we've talked about for several years. Wouldn't it be great if we could bring the same kind of conference that happens in Topeka every 2 years, if we could bring that more locally and beyond just Butler County, from South Central Kansas. So we're pleased to have this opportunity, and our sponsor for the program is the Kansas Council on Developmental Disabilities. So at this time, I'd like to introduce someone that I've known for better than 10 years and consider him not only a colleague, but a close friend, Mr. Steve Barr.
Thank you, Dale, and I appreciate that you just said 10 years.
Yeah.
Because as I was wandering around the crowd earlier today, I was running into a lot of my friends that have been in the employment business for 30, 40 years, and it's just kind of neat to see that. And on behalf of the council, I really appreciate the fact that you guys were able to put this together and get such a great turnout. Do I have any council members here? I didn't see anyone when I came in, but I just wanted to double check, make sure. Okay. So anyway, employment first is one of the most important things that I think the council works on every other year, and to have an off-year event like this sounds like a great idea, great turnout. Let's learn a lot, and then let's go ahead and figure out how to do employment first. Really appreciate seeing Project Search here. The council started Project Search, I think in about 2010, and that's continued to grow. I think there's 13 sites now. And yeah, Cheryl's shaking her head, yes. And so there's a lot of these kinds of projects and things that the councils get involved with. And the thing is, we only get them started. It takes other people to keep them going and make them work. And so we really appreciate that you guys are standing up and taking a leadership role on employment for Kansans with disabilities. Thank you, Dale.
Well, thanks, Steve. I'd also like to recognize a few people you can see by your programs and around the hall, or around the room here, and then downstairs there are others. I think we have around 24 vendors that are available, so anything that you might be interested in that supports employment, you'll find it at this conference. So there are breaks available to take advantage of those, of speaking with those vendors. I might point out one opportunity that's here is a program that you should, if you don't already know about, is Working Healthy of Kansas. They consist of counselors that can sit down with individuals one-on-one and guide you. If you're on Social Security benefits and you want to go back to work but you're afraid of losing your benefits, they can guide you through what's it going to look like and hopefully help you to be able to become employed and end up in a better place and actually earn more money than you could on the disability benefits. So their booth is downstairs. And then there's also a breakout session for them. I guess the other folks that I really need to thank is the members, or are the members of our Employment First Coalition. When we found out that we had the resources to put on this conference, we broke into committees, and this is the greatest volunteer group I've ever been associated with. Because these were not just committees where you sit around and talk about things, it was action items. And so everything that you have down to this wonderful program, table decorations, you name it, this group worked on it. And I'd like to recognize them. So would the Employment First members please stand up, be recognized? They're over there in the back corner. They're still working. You might notice that the members also have one of these red stripes on their name tag. So as the day goes through and you have questions, need help, find somebody with a red badge, and we'll find the answers for you. So, which leads us to, it's my pleasure to announce our keynote speaker this morning. Is someone that I've known for several years and admire in his work with the business community, and actually work with businesses to ensure that there are opportunities for people with disabilities to become employed. We can talk about and train, but if those opportunities aren't there, then our work is in vain. So I'm excited and I'm pleased and honored to welcome, let's see, I had to write some of this down. His bio is in your program. But I knew him first with the Greater Kansas City Business Leadership Network. And since then, he's moved on to a new position. I won't go through every job that he's had, but I'll tell you that his life's been devoted to working with the business community and helping people with disabilities. So without further ado, let me introduce and let's have a big round of applause for Mr. Rob Hoffman.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me without that one? This one just makes me want to do karaoke or something. How's everybody doing? You ready for the day? This, I had talked to, first of all, I want to thank the coalition and Dale and Doug for inviting me to do this. This was, we talked a number of months ago, and I think I remember one on our first calls or the emails, it was like, well, we're shooting for like 80 to 100 this first time, and then I think within the first week, you guys already had 100 registered, and then over 200. So, I think that just speaks to the interest in employment. And I know that there's folks here from beyond Butler County, so I think this is awesome. So, as Dale kind of mentioned in my bio, or it almost looks like an obituary anymore. when you read through, there's been a lot of jobs, but what I'm going to say is my focus in my career for 30-some years has been employment, and that's another reason I'm just excited to be here and applaud the work of the coalition and the Employment First efforts. Employment's tough, regardless if you have a disability or not. And what we need to do is continue our focus and those supports and make an intentional effort in terms of supporting people to gain employment. So a little about myself, and I'm going to kind of work backwards into this and use some of the presentation to explain a little bit more. But I started out years ago, and I don't know, did anybody in here, when you were growing up and 10 years ago, somebody asked you what you want to do and you say, I want to be a rehabber. Anybody? I'm going to do this. People that are in the employment realm, I have not met one that grew up wanting to do this. It wasn't like in their dream. Like my wife, she's one of those rare people that knew early on, I'm going to be a dental hygienist. I don't know why anybody would just grow up with the dream of cleaning teeth, but she did, and she's one of those rare people in her dream job, But for the people that are in our field, something happened, right? Something triggered us, a family member, an experience, or something got us into it. I'll talk about mine later on. But I really devoted my career into, things happen. And I started out working in a sheltered workshop. I was, and I'll tell that story later. I didn't last long there. So, and then started with supported employment with Steve and Dale, a few of us have been around long enough to remember when that started. I ended up being like the first job coach in Wyoming. I'm from, I started my career in Wyoming, so there were no roadmaps, there were no books to do this stuff. And quite honestly, it's like, I think we did better back then when we didn't have all these cool, innovative you know what I mean? It was just, I didn't know what I was doing, but I just did it. And it seemed simpler. And I don't know if it was because of funding, because it was, you know, all this stuff that we've got going. And there's many times I say, you know, we're always waiting for the next best thing. And what happened is we forgot the basics. And I think, you know, we have to kind of step back and say, you know, what are those strategies that are proven that we need to work on to support folks? So I, you know, started my own employment agency once I got kind of, you know, a little bit discouraged with a large organization that necessarily, you know, employment services was an add-on. It wasn't a primary service, so I went out and started my own employment agency and went out and bought a house, an old house, and rehabbed it. And what we did was made it totally community-based. The only time anybody came to our offices was basically when we did, you know, intake, and everything else was done in the communities. So this was the early 90s. So any kind of our assessments or work experiences or any of that was done in the community. That's where we say, that's where employment happens. It didn't happen in an office, it didn't happen in an artificial environment, anything like that. So we did some pretty creative things. And, you know, I know Kansas is fairly rural. Wyoming is profoundly rural, if you want to label it. So we had to be really creative, you know, in terms of, you know, the amount of job opportunities, the types. So, you know, everybody's talking about, ooh, customized employment. It's like, we've been doing that forever. They just, you know, tried to find a cooler word for it. You know, it was, that's what we had to do, was be creative and work, and I'll tell some stories about that. And then throughout my career, it's like we were doing some fun stuff, and then you get kind of, you know, invited out to go speak and do conferences and all that good stuff. So ended up getting recruited by a few universities to work on projects, and specifically related to employment, which was, you know, it's that innovation piece again, which, you know, I almost feel partly responsible for trying to put these cool things in place to get us away from the basics. So I'm going to hope that, you know, as we talk today, and you know, I'll share some of my experiences, that you know, we kind of don't forget those basics, that you know, really what established employment services and supports for folks. And then, you know, lately, what I knew early on in my career when it came to employment was the missing link in this whole thing was the business community. We had funding for people, we had services, we had supports, but yet there was none of that for the business community. And if you don't have the relationships and jobs, how are you going to make that connection, correct? So for the, you know, past probably 15 or 20 years, my main focus has been working with companies and to work with them to enhance and understand and build a culture that's, you know, welcoming and supportive to all employees, but more so people with disabilities, because we know that there's a business case, a proven business case, that disability inclusion is a business strategy that actually affects the ROI of companies. They get it. There are, you know, companies that are, you know, you're hearing, you know, Amazon, your Walgreens, you know, these big companies, but little companies get it as well. So, you know, we've got to make sure. I always think that the formula for employment is pretty easy. Know the person, know the job, make the match. That's it. All right? It's that missing piece of helping employers figure it out. That's where we need to be doing it, because I think we do a fairly good job of working with candidates to get to know them. It's just bridging that gap. So back in Wyoming, when the business leadership, they're called disability inns now, and it doesn't roll off the tongue, but they're business leadership networks. So I started one of those. They're business-to-business organizations. So a group of passionate, you know, business folks that come together and say, how do we push this employment agenda for people with disabilities? So it's not only within our company, but we are going to be the champions outside of our companies. So those were successful in Wyoming, and then the last 6 or 7 years, I was the executive director of the Kansas City Business Leadership Network, which, that brought in these huge companies, which was fun to work with, but, big companies are big companies. They're a big ship to move. Whereas when you're working with smaller companies, the small business, medium-sized business, they tend to be more flexible and adaptable and work. So I always say in employment, people are trying to walk in and look at these big companies and say, oh, we need to get in there. We need to remember that most of the jobs are in small business and your medium-sized business. So, and actually you can get to the decision makers. So anyway, I want to get to this employment first stuff because this has been around quite a while in Butler County. You guys were the first coalition to be established. Is that what you said, Dale?
Well, yeah, with that title, with the employment first, I'm sure there's a lot of area groups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In here. So, so it's been around a while, and I want to just walk you through kind of what, when the employment first started coming out, APSE, the Association for Persons for Employment First, it used to be the Association for Persons in Support of Employment, but it's changed. They created this manifesto. And so it was really kind of the first white paper or manifesto that came out to talk about employment first that would help guide this. And so I'll just read this piece, which is really hard for me over here. But employment first means expecting, encouraging, providing, creating, and rewarding integrated employment in the general workforce as the first and preferred option of youth and adults with disabilities. So when you look at that, it's anybody that's entering services from day one, employment, the goal, right? The ultimate outcome and the option that everything should be leading to is community employment integrated, just like everybody else. And services and support should be designed around that. So, in my mind, I try to make it simple. Everything we do, we just kind of keep this in mind. All roads lead to employment. Everything we do, all roads lead to employment. All right? Break that down a little bit. Employment First promotes policies, practices, and strategies that focus on integrated community-based employment as a desired outcome for everybody. Guiding principles, practices, strategies are disseminated through state statute, regulation, makes funding for integrated employment a priority. Are we there yet? No, yes? Just give me a mercy nod, one way or the other. They are awake. How many people say that we're there yet? Statutes, policies, funding are driving this, are putting things in place. Anybody? How many don't think we're there yet? Okay, that wasn't meant to be a loaded question. So maybe we have some stuff to talk about. I was just talking to Steve about, you guys went through that whole exercise where you're talking about the system and put those notes on there. So, I mean, there's efforts there. We're not there. And, I've been around forever, it seems like, in this. And there are times I just get frustrated that we've been doing, all of this work, and it's like, are we making gains? But I have to go back and say, you know what? We have. We've made gains. We're on the radar, and we've impacted, hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people's lives over my career throughout the day, when I'm looking at this in a broader perspective. But I'm not sure we've necessarily created a system that promotes exactly what we're talking about today. Okay, there's still some of those barriers. I'll do some musings at the end to kind of reinforce that. Employment First typically can use supported or customized employment strategies. But it's not how we define employment first, okay? Or employment. These are simply strategies that we put into place to make people successful, all right? Here's what it really centers on. Holding individuals with disabilities to the same employment standards, responsibilities, and expectations as any working age adult. I'll even put youth in there. It's about high expectations. That's what Employment First is. I wish it was about, or I don't even wish it was. Never mind, I was going to go down a road. I'm not going to go there. It's not about funding. It's not about services, right? It's a broad picture of saying, do we have the same expectations for people with disabilities as we have for ourselves or others have for us? I would imagine most people in here were like me, or how many people in here as a, student when you were younger, your parents didn't have the expectation that you would work? Anybody? No. That's just the way we grew up, right? You will work. I'm from Wyoming, so I started my first job at 10 years old. I'm still thinking I could probably sue for child labor laws. Maybe they didn't have them then, And I'll sue again because I had to work for my grandpa, who was the worst boss. Love him to death, but I didn't want to work for him. I learned all my cuss words from him. You can tell the environment we worked at. It was a golf course, but if you think about it, our whole younger years prepare us to work and get a career. School, right? Why do we go to school? That is preparing you for a vocation, an eventual career. Sure, you get some life skills in that, but at the end of the day, as you progress through that, it is preparing you to work. So why are expectations different for people with disabilities? That one I haven't been able to answer. I think we've had terribly low expectations for people with disabilities. That's just my personal, I'm old enough now and advanced in my career, I can just say that stuff, Because we got to treat everybody the same. So let's look at this. The real engine, if we're going to call employment first, not a policy, not an initiative or anything like that. This is a social change event that we're trying to work through. But we have players, like Steve and the council that are working on policy, right? We have other people working on strategies, the organizations. We have coalitions that are coming together to solve problems within a broader space than their own organization, right? This is a social change movement. That's what we need to begin to look at this, and it takes all of us. It takes all the stakeholders, right? From people with disabilities to family members to providers, right? Policymakers, all the way through the system. But this change is not about funding. It's about expectations. And if we're all in line about having the same expectations for people, that will drive policy, that will drive funding, that will drive change. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Because I'm afraid you're wanting to take a break already or something. Not yet. Expectations. So we can't afford to wait for some kind of formal initiative to happen. It's like, we're going to get together and have this formal, initiative, or we're going to throw funding at something, And I know states have. I did a lot of work in Ohio, and they had this Employment First initiative, and it was, the DD system partnering with Voc Rehab and putting money, and it was like, to me, in a way, it's like a valiant effort, right? And they did some kind of neat things, but it's being driven by, to me, again, I can say this, the exact system that needed to change. There were no outside forces that were kind of pushing this. Again, it was, it needed to be a much broader collective driving that. So some of us, anybody old enough to remember, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, Occupy Wall Street. So during the last recession, there was not too many favorable views of Wall Street, correct? I mean, we saw the stock market crash, the economy crash, all of that happened. And so there was a movement onto Wall Street to say there is too much power, too much control, too much money, and that affected virtually every one of us in here somehow because of mismanagement, greed, all of that good stuff. So there's this huge movement. I'm going to say with this employment first, and we're talking about social change, I think we need to approach this as occupy the workforce. We need to get folks out there because we're not going to change attitudes, expectations, unless we're embedded in that very, place that we want to change. So why not occupy the workforce? So what are we going to do? It's not going to be funding, or it's not going to be a policy that's going to do that. It's going to be a social movement that we've got to employ. And that's why we're here today, to do this. Talk about expectations. Any Royals fans in here? All right, a few of us. Who do you root for then? Be the Rockies maybe, or something like that? So, 2015 World Series champions, right? 2014 didn't quite make it. But I kept hearing people going like, what a fluke. The Royals got in there, right? You're talking small market, ball club. I think they were in the lower quarter of payroll. There was not one standout player on this whole team. The Derek Jeter, these big name people. This was like a bunch of working class baseball guys that came together. Nobody had expectations, let alone to make it to the series. They lose, and everybody's kind of like, well, yeah, that was a fluke. The very next year, they come back and win it, right? Do you think those folks on the team had high expectations for themselves? Absolutely, even when others didn't. That was a fun time in Kansas City in that area because it was just like, look at this team. They aren't multi-million-dollar players. They aren't, this is just a bunch of guys that were, if you watched every one of those games, they were having fun. This wasn't a job, didn't show up every day. It was like, I think it was their attitude and their expectations for themselves. Oh, I don't know why I'm clicking this at the screen. It's the computer. All right, so I want to change this a little bit. I've worked with hundreds of people who happen to need support over my career, and here's what I've determined. In most cases, a person is more disabled by low expectations, the culture, access, and environment than the disability itself. Can you agree with that? I'm not discounting that there are certain things that are inherent with disability. But I'm saying this is more disabling to people. It prevents them from accessing the community, being included in the community, and the same in the workforce. So what I want you all to be thinking about is, how do you champion the fact that yourself, if you're someone that experiences a disability, if you have a loved one, if you're a professional, how do we champion this on a more broader scale in the community to address these areas? Environmental barriers, cultural and attitudinal barriers, and all of that. What I'm saying is, it's kind of bigger than ourselves, But each of us can do little things that will help remove some of these barriers for folks. So I want to talk to you about the expectations. Kind of our roles in this. So we can make this, make an impact for folks. And you yourself make an impact for yourself. Professionals, so I'm just talking all of us that, may be paid in some way to support individuals. Number one, promote employment from day one, regardless of what it is you do. You could be a first grade teacher and have a student with a disability in there. You can promote employment from day one because that's what we're doing anyway with every other student. Somebody new comes to your program and they may be put into a day program. That day program should be promoting employment from day one. It's not a place that you stay. Your expectations should be, you're here because of these certain things. But again, at the end of the day, everything we do means all roads lead to employment, no matter where you're at in that service, system. Hold everybody accountable. The person, yourself, other supporters, members of that team, everybody's accountable to have the same expectations, and everything is driving towards supporting that person to learn about themselves, gain the necessary skills, ultimately leading to employment. Talk about the possibilities with folks. Are there teachers in here? So you've set in IEPs, and I've sat through my fair share, and I tend to joke, it's kind of, and I'm sure they've changed, it's been a while, but it was like, assume the IEP position. The student was like this, head down, because all we did was talk about, all the challenges and barriers, because that drives funding, right? So there was more time spent on issues and behavior, these things that would allow for a goal that would trigger funding, and then we say, oh, by the way, they do great at this. Can you see how that kind of, if you have the whole meeting talking about the things the person can't do or needs to do, right? And a little about, boy, here are those areas that we need to work on. I'm going to digress a little bit just because it popped into my head. It'll become clear in a minute why things pop in my head. But my nephew, he has a disability, and so he just started 7th grade, and he is just the nicest kid, but he's got some barriers, right? But early on, I knew that this kid had some skills. Of course, his mom and dad, my sister and brother-in-law, they're like, oh, what are we going to do? I'm worried about, it's like natural for any parent to have that. And I'm the one that just says, well, you just got to figure out where this kid's going to shine, and then you go for it. You put, we learned early on, Michael's his name, you didn't leave your phone sitting around when Michael was around, because you would have to reset the phone. He could go in at 4 or 5 years old and jack with your whole phone and rechange the settings, and and my sister would get mad at him, and of course me, after resetting it 5 times, I didn't learn. That was my fault for not hiding it, right? But I was just like, that's incredible. He's found places on my phone that I don't even know where he went. So let's fast forward. He just entered junior high school. He's now on the Wyoming hackers list. My sister called me crying. He's like, Michael got in trouble today, and now he's like on the list as a hacker on the state of Wyoming. And I'm like, that's brilliant. What'd he do? He said he hacked into the school system and created his own admin account. Brilliant. And she's like, I hate you. You can't do that. I'm like, no. Here's what you need to do. This is where the focus needs to be. This kid is tech savvy. So what he's doing is, sure, he may have behaviors and he's getting in trouble in all those other courses. You need to guide him towards this piece. And if you can structure that, and because that's what he loves, you're going to be successful. So it's taken her a while to figure that out. I don't know how he gets off the hacker list, though. That's going to be kind of, you know, but I mean, the kid's got a gift, and that's what we need to focus on and point him in the right direction. So, you know, that's just kind of my, you know, personal how it hits me in terms of saying, gosh, we could focus on all this other stuff that we don't think's working. Let's focus on the stuff that's working and guide him there, okay? Teach, mentor, support, don't enable. We've got too many helpers already, okay? So when we're a professional, we're going in there, we have to have those high expectations, and we got to be like a coach, by a mentor, and guide folks. You got to push people. Mistakes are okay. How do we learn? You learn more from mistakes, right, than successes. So we got to take that risk. Family members. We have family members in here. Awesome. So here's what we got to do. Treat your son or daughter like you would any of your other kids. All of us hear those inspiring stories or those keynote speakers, right, that happen to have disabilities. You know, the guy that pops into my head was that college wrestler that, did he have any with no arms, I think, or, you know, is that correct? It was, but inspiring story. I've heard him, and Josh Blue, the comedian, met him, and everything, when I hear their stories, the one thing that they all have in common was the fact that their parents didn't treat them any differently. Bill, great start to today. That's 50 years ago. Well, not 50, but 40 years ago when she was entering the school system, right? Your dad, Floyd, comes in and just says, she will go to school. I have these expectations. That's breaking barriers, considering the time frame of that. Because most people would have probably went to an institution. Am I correct on that? Yeah. So, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, there aren't certain things that you will have to, you know, understand and treat differently and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, if you start out with those high expectations, right, and treat everybody like everybody else, then you're pointing them in the path that we all should be going down. Same standards. Put success in their heads early on. I'm trying to do that with Michael, right? But I'm hiding my phone, but, you know, it's like, you're great at this. Show me how to do this. He gets excited when he can, you know, when he can focus on that. Drive the system, don't ride it. Okay? I see this too many times that people receiving supports and family members are a passive element in that process. The system, to me, is meant to support you and to support that person, not do everything for you. And it is easy to go into a situation where they say, we know best. Well, the professionals, they're trained on that, but they should use that experience to support you to drive it, not drive it themselves. You've got to be active. That means through the educational system, through that transition to adult life. You know, you have to understand that system and know what your rights and responsibilities and, you know, all of that good stuff, and drive that system. For folks out there that are receiving services, those of you that might experience disability, question things. Okay? We talk about self-determination, self-direction, all of that. But if something doesn't seem right, you know, in terms of what people are recommending for you or you know, certain programs or, you know, you've got to question it. Because I will say, if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. If it's not leading you to where you want to be. You have every right to question it. Make sure any goals or those services are leading where you want to be. Again, if it doesn't make sense and doesn't fit into your mind and your plan of how you're planning to get someplace, question it. Use the system to get there, not to tell you how. Okay? You're entitled to these services and supports. Leverage them, work them to your advantage. You can't be passive in this. You know what's best for you. Don't assume it's going to be easy. Okay, life isn't easy. Getting a job isn't easy. All of that. Everybody, all of us that are working right now, starting in our careers, wasn't easy. You got to start out in jobs you don't like. It's just the way it is, you know? But through experience, developing those skills, getting more self-confidence, you can leverage those to get a better job and a better job and a better job, and eventually you'll land in that one that you like more things of it than you don't. Okay? Finally, I'm going to say, if you don't have high expectations for yourself, how can you expect anybody else to? We can't, you know, high expectations, you got to come in and say, at the end of the day, everything I do, I want to work. This is what I want to do. How are you going to help me get there? Don't let people tell you that. You got to drive it. So I'm going to just kind of work back a little bit. And so I got this quote up here that I thought was pretty nice. You know, like a drop in the vast ocean, each of us causes ripples as we move through our lives. So as I reflect back, you know, again, I'm old enough to be able to reflect on a career. You kind of think back about those things that impacted me in terms of my career, and how people or experiences were like that drop that created these ripples. And, you know, again, when you kind of reflect back on your career, it's like, well, you know, what kept me doing this? Or who changed the way I looked at things? Or, you know, and all of us have. We've met somebody that's impacted us. And so I want to start with just kind of introducing you to some people. So here's the first one. So, student. Darn it, I can't read that. So here's kind of, you know, when you look through like the feedback you get for the student. So easily distracted, needs to apply himself. Performance doesn't, you know, reflect academic potential. Class clown. Doesn't pay attention. Guidance counselor, based on all this, says, there's like a light right up there. You benefit from a highly structured job, repetition, maybe type assembly work, and then critical thinking skills, you know, not a major factor of that job. Okay? So that's just based on it. Oh, isn't he cute? That's me. So, I love the cowboy hat. I'm from Wyoming, man. Everybody had a cowboy hat once. So this was me. So probably it was 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with ADD. Isn't that crazy? I wish I had the H in there, because I need that energy, the hyperactive piece. Attention deficit disorder, which explains a lot in my childhood. You know, it was like school. It took me forever. I mean, it took me 10 years to graduate from college. To go, you know, started, stopped, because, you know, those like freshman, sophomore classes, it's boring. I knew it, but it was just like, why am I here? You know, I was a ski instructor. I'm sitting in Bozeman, Montana, and we just got 6 inches of fresh powder, and I'm thinking I could go make $40, or I could learn about biology. I'm out, pew, you know. And then, you know, I'm like, highly structured repetition. You know, one of my jobs was working at a grocery store, and I'd be like stocking a shelf. Ooh, you know, new flavor of Captain Crunch. I was all over the place, you know. It was like repetition wasn't good for me because I got bored so easily. And what they call it attention deficit disorder, that's the wrong label. It's attention abundance disorder, because I pay attention to everything. And you know, this PowerPoint presentation, I could probably do this without it, like those TED Talks, but I don't know where I'd go. This keeps me on track. It brings me back because I can go on a rant or whatever. So what's interesting is you see this guy, you know, those were all wrong in terms of, you know, the structure. So I've actually had to navigate my career myself, you know, in terms of jobs. I was figuring things out like the grocery store. My manager there, we didn't even call it accommodation at that point, but he said he can't be in one place too long. So I became like a utility player. You know, as soon as I started, you know, looking around, he was just like, why don't you go up and check? So I had to check people out. Oh, we got a truck going in, come in, you know. So I ended up doing a lot of things because he valued what I brought to the workplace, right? I was a hard worker, showed up, didn't, you know, all of that stuff. But I couldn't be stuck in that one position. So he was like, we value what you bring, but we got to change things up to help make you successful. Companies do that all the time, okay? So, you know, it's you say kind of we know best for ourselves type situation. And, you know, I eventually, you know, so I started an organization. So I'm one of those that had to land in something where something new is happening all the time. And so been able to start initiatives when working at universities or do consulting work. Lots of variety for me, because if I'm stuck in something too long, you know, all of a sudden it becomes repetitious to me. And if I'm not getting that, you know, stimulation. So working for myself and doing these different things is a good fit for me. Starting things, you know, getting that energy, and then I turn them over. You know, once they're established and running, I turn them over and say, what's the next thing? Probably wouldn't look too good on a resume, but, you know, at the end of the day, I'm job hopper. Well, no, I can show the outcomes of exactly what I've done to establish that. So, glad I didn't follow the guidance counselor. I'd probably be unemployed at this point. So I'm going to work backwards and just introduce you to a few people that have impacted my career. First one is Jim. So this was probably, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. I was working with the, consulting with the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And we did a self-employment boot camp for people with disabilities. So, you know, we think, you know, self-employment's a viable option. So we did a month-long, you know, every weekend, for a month or 6 weeks or something like that. 6 different sessions of building a business plan from concept to all of that, all, you know, testing your market testing, all of that. And it was really fun, but this gentleman, Jim, came in, and so he was a person with cerebral palsy, older gentleman. And, you know, he was there, and he was, you know, came with his attendant, and was just very engaged the whole time. And once it ended, he came up and asked if, you know, well, I've got this going, but he said, would you mind continuing to help me out? And I'm like, you know, absolutely. He lived pretty close to me, you know, I'm in Smithville, Missouri, he's in Liberty, so it's 10 minutes. If they're meeting, I'll go over and help. So I went over and met with him he was living in a group home, because I just wanted to get to know him. And this is one of those stories that, positive, but hurts me at the same time. When I met Jim, he was about 70 years old. He had spent over 50 years in an institution. 50 years, because again, when he was born, that's what doctors said. Your son, actually he was a twin. And so they told the parents, what I would do, it's just in your best interest right now is to send them to an institution and forget about them. That was his words to me. He didn't see his parents for almost 50 years. So then when the deinstitutionalization piece started coming in, it's like we need to get folks out, move them out. Jim gets moved from an institution to a nursing home. So he's sitting there, you know, it's just like from one place to a smaller institution. Not the nursing, you know, again, for the right people, fine, but not Jim. 10 years until finally community program said we got to move him out, and he moved into, finally got connected with this, you know, organization. Unfortunately, by that time, you know, he's 65, 66, 67, somewhere around there. And then he said, what I really want to do is work. And so they went to BR, and BR said, you're too old. And he got depressed, you know, so then we thought, self-employment, we want to do this. So the guy was, you know, at the boot camp, and he was actually volunteering to shred stuff at the organization. Of course, my first question is, do they have a volunteer program for shredders at this organization? No, I asked his attendant. He's like, no, and I said, are you paying him? And they said, no, and I said, you better look into that. If he's providing a service that a paid person would do, you may want to, you know, so then all of a sudden they're like, ooh. I said, I'm not turning you in, but it's just like, you got to think about it, you know. If he's doing work somebody else is getting paid for, then you might want to slip him some money to do this. But anyway, he loved shredding. Very social guy, but there weren't like shredding jobs. So as we were planning, we said, what about, you know, starting a mobile shredding company? And we ended up calling it Jim's Shred to Go. And we couldn't get any money, any startup money, right? Because, you know, basically at that point, you know, it was difficult for BR to make that decision and fund it and everything. So we said, well, who do we know? And we worked with the organization because they had vans that were sitting during the most part of the day that they said, yeah, we could allow initially to start using vans. Jim went to church, and the attendant that went to church, you know, he was very social and everybody knew him at church. Ended up running into a guy that donated industrial shred that could be put in the van, so that was free. And then we used, you know, his funding allowed for the, you know, one-to-one support, so they would be on there. So eventually, he ended up getting 3 different contracts and started his own shredding business. You know, he wasn't making a ton of money. But Jim was one at that point, he didn't care about the money. It was the fact that he was working, he was out in the community, he was meeting new people, you know, that's what he got out of work. In fact, they had to show him how to cash a check. He had never done that in his life, you know. So he was able to do this for, I think, a couple years, maybe, something like that. I kind of lost track until health issues hit. But you know what? At least the last couple years, he was doing what he wanted to do. And I applaud him, but I applaud that organization. He had some supporters that were right there. They were 100% behind him. And, you know, they said, we're going to figure this out. Let's do this. So it wasn't just Jim. It was, you know, it was this team that was committed. They had the expectations, high expectations. But Jim was the one that had the expectation for himself where nobody else did. So then, you know, when you think back, it's just like, dang, you know, I can't speak for his life, but what if this would have happened 30 years ago, you know? And what would he have done, and what could he have done? But you know what? At the end of the day, what I gotta say, his last few years, he was working. And he was doing it on his own terms. And he owned his own business, you know? So that's the one that says, you know what? The stuff that we do is important in supporting folks. So that was like, so working backwards a little bit more, I'll introduce you to Roger. So this is kind of an interesting one. Roger, so I mentioned that I had an employment agency in Wyoming, and we had worked out a deal with the local VA hospital where we would do our kind of assessment work experience programs because, you know, if you're familiar with VA hospitals, they have virtually every job possible, you know? And so we knew the HR person pretty well, and so we were able to use different areas so people could go out and, you know, explore, work different jobs and kind of figure out what they wanted to do, gain some skills, and they would get a nice letter from the VA, you know, as they completed that work experience. So I'm calling in, and I always did it like a weekly checkup or bi-weekly checkup, you know, with the HR department to see how things are going and whatever. And I called up, and her name was Judy, and I said, hey, Judy, I'm just calling up, and it's like, you know, looks like Roger's about done with everything. I just want to see how things are going and get some feedback. And then she goes, well, you never want an HR person to go, well, and just pause. And I'm like, oh, crap. What's going on? She says, well, Roger kind of is doing this a little bit different. And I was like, he's doing it a little different? And it's like, well, yeah, you know, we were going to have him sort the mail and you know, I don't know what happened, but he kind of created his own job. And I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? You know, and I said, well, you got to tell me a little bit more about this. And she says, well, he was around, and, you know, everybody loves Roger around here, and somebody somewhere along the line asked him if he would take this mail, and as he's going down, would he, you know, hand it off to so-and-so. And apparently over the past week or 2 weeks, Roger's then asked that person if they have any mail to go over. He created a route by himself. Because he got to, he's a very social guy, right? So he was just like, this is more fun than sorting mail and stuff like that. I get to go do all this. And I'm like, wow, so you're okay with that? And they said, people are loving it, you know? And I was like, okay, so, you know, again, they didn't have the funds to hire because I was just like, well, if you value that, can you just take Roger on? It's like, well, we don't have the fund, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay. So we come back, and I'm sitting there with my employment coordinator and Roger, and Roger's like, I want to deliver mail. And I'm like, well, you know, it's like, you know, you have the testing to be a post, you know, all of that stuff, and it's just like, well, I don't know if we can, you know, let's explore that. And so we said, you know, being very scientific, you know, where is somebody going to deliver mail in Wyoming if you can't be in the actual post office? We did something very scientifically. We walked out of the office, down 2 blocks to Main Street, and looked both ways for the biggest building. And then what we did is we saw the courthouse over there. 3 stories over 2 buildings, a big place. And I said, you know what, Ron Daly, he's like the clerk of court or something, you know, he had some type, but his name was Ron. And I said, he was my Little League baseball coach, I know him. So I went in and talked to him, and he happened to, part of his job was overseeing the administrative assistants. And so I just did an informational interview with Ron, and I said, you know, hey, you know, we got this guy, and you know, he worked out at the VA, and you know, what he wants to do is deliver mail. And I know you got mail around here. This is a big place. And he says, yeah. He said, but our admin assistants do it. And I was like, oh, okay. So really nothing else, you know, and then I just kind of poked around a little bit and said, yeah, so really nothing that no, they do it, it's all good. And then my employment coordinator is with me, he started to say something, and I just kind of nudged him, and I said, okay, you know, that's fine. I said, but you know, one of the things that we offer from our organization is to kind of come in and look at positions, you know, within your business, and so that way, you know, we kind of know what's going on and know what your expectations are, so if there's ever an opening, you know, we can make a good match. And he's like, well, yeah, you know, we haven't looked at those in a while anyway, we'd love the information. I'm like, yeah, sure. So we went back, and Roger's like, we don't do that. And I said, well, we're going to start now because I said it. You build this plane while you're flying it, right? So he said, well, why did you say that? And I said, they've got a mail problem. So we need to go in there and see what's actually happening. So we went in there and started interviewing those admin assistants, right? And said, they're like, okay, tell me about your job. Oh, well, I filed, no, tell me about, you know, so I'm trying to get them through to talk about the mail. And then when we finally got them to talk, it turns out they were spending, you know, and I can't remember the numbers, in customized employment, I have the whole sheet, but it was like, it takes them anywhere to like 45 minutes to an hour for the mail piece, because the mail didn't come at a regular time, so they had to keep going down and check. And then once they got it, they would sort it, right? And then bring it up and do their different, so there were 10 different admin folks doing this. And then I learned how much they made, and so I put pencil to paper. 10 times 45 minutes times, can't remember, it's $11 an hour, right? I was able to go back in to Ron and say, remember when we were talking about that mail thing? I said, it's costing you like $28,000 a year to do mail. And I showed him the figures. Maybe it was $22,000, something like that. And he's like, whoa. I said, well, that's just kind of what you're spending in salary, not necessarily taking their attention away from the work. And he's like, yeah. And I said, you know, you could hire Roger part-time for 12 grand a year, and you would be saving money. And he was like, wow, really? Well, we don't have, you know, can you come and talk to the county commissioners? And I'm like, absolutely. So I went and did it, you know, to them, but I was just saying, you know how you can show your constituents how you're saving, you know, being smart with taxpayer dollars, and they were like all over it. They hired Roger. He was like the postmaster of the courthouse. And I think he had that job for, man, it's been a long time since I've been there, probably 15, 16, 17 years that he was doing that. So we wrote a pass plan for actually a cab to pick him up at his apartment, take him to the post office, pick up the mail, so they knew exactly when the mail was going to get there. His route was timed, everything was efficient, you know, and this guy was loving life, right? So, you know, here's Roger. So we did some creative stuff, so you're wondering what that cart was up there. You know, again, we're very scientific people. So we went and bought a wooden microwave cart and cut the top out of it and put bars in it so we could put the files in it. So it's actually a microwave cart. Inexpensive accommodation to let him do this, because he had some physical issues. So what was interesting, so I mean, I'll get back to that, but so he had worked like 4 to 5 hours a day in the morning, and then all of a sudden he came back in, and we got a note that, you know, Roger kind of got in trouble for something at the program he was in during the rest of the day. And when I learned out, he was going from the county courthouse back to the DAHAP program. So I'm like, I need a meeting with whoever's in charge of this program. And it was, you just want to see the irony in this, okay? Is the fact that he was put back into a day program because of a behavioral issue. And the first thing I could say is, like, I don't even want to talk through with you guys, but think about it this way. He spends 4 to 5 hours a day interacting with highly professional people, is very successful on the job, right? And then you put him here to do puzzles and all of this stuff. I would have behaviors too. Probably worse than Roger. Well, what are we going to do with him? I said, I don't know. But he's a working person. He's got his own apartment. What do you do after work? Do you go to a program? You know? So we ended up designing it where when he was done with work, he got to go home. Go to a movie, go do something like that. He didn't have to be in our structured programs, you know? So, again, it's just see where things you just kind of learn from these experiences. This is where I learned about employment being a business strategy, right? I didn't approach this, my main goal was to support Roger to get this job that he really wanted, but I figured out that if I can make it make sense, or even dollars and cents to a company, this employment thing will work. So this was where, this changed my mindset and how I approach employment and how we need to show how anybody we support to gain employment or present to a company adds value to that company. It doesn't necessarily have to be dollars and cents, right? It could be attitude, it could be motivation, it could be the positive effect on a culture, hundreds of different things. So, what time am I supposed to wrap this up? I got all day, don't I? We'll see. Maybe a little early, may not. Way back in my career, I'm working backwards to show why I'm still doing this. And I can almost safely say why I'm still doing it is because of John. I told you earlier that I started out in a sheltered workshop. Okay? So let me tell you this story. Because I didn't profess to be a rehab person when I grew up, or a supported employment, wasn't any of that. I actually owned a video production company and was contracted by Kiewit Mining and Engineering to do their safety and training videos. So I was fairly entrepreneurial early on. And finally, Kiewit offered to buy me out, which is still a dumb move right now. Darn it. You know, but I'm just thinking they're going to offer me some cash. So I used to go do their training like video, you know, at the coal mines, you know, the big drag lines. I'd videotape how to grease the drag lines. It was really cool, but they said, well, you know, we want to bring this in-house. Could we just buy out your company? And they would just bring it in and then train. So I had some, you know, money at that point and time to do something. And so I said, you know, well, let's look through for a job because I took a few months off, obviously, but that wasn't good for me. Just get in trouble when you have too much time on your hands. My parents were right about that. So anyway, I said, I figure I probably should do something because I'm going to go to college at some point. I was 19 years old, got to get to college. So in the meantime, looked through the paper. Small town, not very job opportunities. There was fast food. Promised myself early on I wouldn't work it, so there was a job opening for a furniture production supervisor. What the heck is that? But it's the only other option. I applied for it. It turned out to be at an organization that had this sheltered workshop. And I remember during the interview that they asked, you know, do you have experience refinishing furniture? And I'm like, yeah, I helped my mom strip a chair with form bees once. And they hired me. That's, well, truth be told, I walked by the garage when she was stripping the chair with form bees. But it didn't look that hard to me. They hired, so their standards were pretty high, I guess, to hire me. So I walk in there, and I'm supposed to be running this operation, and I really don't have a clue. So I walk into this workshop, and there's probably 200 people with disabilities, all of which like to hug, by the way. I grew up in a time where there wasn't a lot of interaction with people with disabilities, okay? During school, we didn't eat lunch together. There were different bus stops. They were in the portables behind the pool, you know what I mean? There wasn't interaction, so I'm pretty sure for 3 days I stood with my back against the wall saying, do not hug me again. Do not, you know. 3 days into this or something. So I'm not a huggy person anyway, and I certainly wasn't used to huggy during work day. You know what I mean? It was just odd to me. So we stopped the hugging. That was my first official rule in a workplace. Unless it's an event or something appropriate, we don't run around and hug. Anyway, after 3 days, all of a sudden, John comes up to me and he says, "You don't have a clue, do you?" I'm like, "No, but don't tell anybody." So here's John. He's going around. He's the guy that's the mechanic. He's doing everything, right? So I didn't realize he was actually somebody that received services. I thought he was like, not the supervisor, but the guy that managed it, all of this. And I was like, "No, man." He goes, "Okay, let me take you through this." And he gave me this table leg. And he walked me through and said, "Okay, when somebody brings in a piece of furniture, we got this cheat sheet. So if it's a 2-drawer dresser, it's this much." And I'm like, "This is brilliant." Because in my mind, I'm thinking I can actually even appear fairly competent by giving him a price. He says, "So once we get that, then we take the hardware off. We label it, put in these, and then we determine if it's a big item, it'll go on the table, stripping table. Other items will go into the vat where we dunk it. Once you get it out of there, it's rinsed off, then we take it out to have it sanded. Once it's sanded, we take it in and we do the staining. From staining, goes into polyurethane, final finish work, out the door." Okay? He said, "Why don't you do this table leg?" So I did my table leg, did it all the way through, we finished it, and that way I actually understood the process. Then it was about 3 weeks or 4 weeks later into that, I had to do the client payroll, and the third name on the list was John's. I thought he was my coworker, right? And I said, "John, you gotta come here, man. They're jacking with you. They put you on the client payroll." And he goes, "No." He said, "I'm the highest paid client. I've been here 10 years. He's making $1.80 an hour. And he just taught me how to do my job." So I don't know if I knew what advocacy was at that point, but I went to the production supervisor and I said, didn't have a lot of pride at that point because it was like, this is nuts for me, but I said, "John needs to be making as much or more money than me because this guy knows it, and he just taught me how to do this stuff." And the response was, "Well, he can't. He's a client." Again, I'm coming out of this, like, from this world into this world, right? And I'm like, no, that doesn't make sense. And he said, "Well, people are saying blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, okay. And it's like, and I don't like to level jump, right? But, so then I went to the next person, case manager, and then I went to whatever, and then finally I went up to the CEO of the organization, and I got the same answer every time, and nobody could answer my question when I said why. You can't just say because he's a client. That doesn't make sense to me. He's better at he could be doing my job, So right then, again, I probably didn't know what advocacy was, but I said, something's wrong here. Remember to question things, right? When it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. So after getting called to the principal's office, that just motivated me because I came back and I said, "You know what? If we didn't hug as much, if we didn't sleep as much, if we kept on task, you guys could be making more money." So I put the screws to everybody. I'm going to run this like an operation. This is work. If this workshop is supposed to be training you for a real job, then you will be on time, you will be on task, right? All of these things. And the next thing you know, I get called into the principal's office, the client payroll's all out of whack. They're making too much money, and I'm like, no. It's because we're producing more. When you produce more, you make more money. It's coming from the private sector into this sector was just blowing my mind. And it's like, well, yeah, but, we got to redo time stay. Third time I got called into the principal's office. It was a CEO and all my supervisors again, and I'm thinking I'm fired this time, but I'm like, in a weird way, I was saying, I'm done with this, because this is so screwed up. On the other hand, it's like, don't fire me, I'm not done yet, So they brought me in, they said, "Rob, there's this new thing called supported employment. We think you'd be good at it." I thought they were thinking, I got these great skills that I could do whatever the supported employment thing is. It's like they just wanted me out of there. No books or manuals. Anybody remember Mark Gold's Try Another Way book? That's about, isn't that what we had back then? That was really about it. And his basic premise in teaching folks is, you know, if this teaching strategy doesn't work, try another way. I mean, it's great stuff. People are still using that systematic instruction to this day. So, guess who the first person I worked with was? John. I said, John, there's this new thing called supported employment. Apparently I'm supposed to go out and talk to businesses and find openings and come back and put people in them, you know, totally backwards, right? But that's the way we did it back then. And, you know, I said, I want to talk to you because, you know, is this really what you want to do? He goes, well, I'm really good at it. And I said, you are, but you're terribly underpaid. You could be making more money if that's, you know. And he says, well, you know, I always wanted to be a chef. And I'm like, you know, I'm like a 20-year-old bachelor. I know ramen, noodles, and drive-through, but I'm not the one to talk to about a chef. But you know what? I got a buddy that owns a seafood restaurant. Let's go talk to him. And he goes, sure. So John and I walk over there, and his name was Rick, Kelly Seafood. And I said, Rick, John wants to be a chef. And I don't know anything about it, but, you know, I figured I'd start with you. I know you. And he goes, well, I'm the owner. I'm not really a chef, but let's go talk to the chef. And the chef comes out, and he's this big, burly, kind of intimidating guy. You know, not stereotypical, but if you think of the Harley guy, you know, I mean, this, you know, tough, you know, and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I could work for this dude, you know. But he comes in and he goes, what do you guys need? And I was like, John wants to be a chef. And he immediately took his eyes off of me and looked at John and spoke to John the whole time. That to me was a turning point in saying, I don't need to represent John. I need to facilitate an introduction. So I changed my ways there. So he's like, John, you want to be a chef? And all of a sudden his demeanor changed, and he was like, because it was like they connected, right? And he said, well, you're going to go to school. John kind of puts his head down. He says, man, I'm not very good at school. I don't have the best reading skills and wasn't success, you know. And, you know, so John was thinking it's kind of over. And the chef says, that's not a problem. He said, if you're willing to start there, and he points to the Hobart dishwasher. He said, you start there, and then after we get you out of there, we'll come you out and have you start bussing tables, right? And then after you learn to bus tables, come back in, you can do some, you know, prep, you know, whatever. So he showed him the progression of working. He said, because as a chef, you're going to have to know everything about this kitchen and how everything works. So you don't have to go to school. It's going to take you longer, it's going to be harder work. But if you're successful, you know, and work through this, you can do what I'm doing. And John looked at him and said, when do I start? And the guy said, tomorrow. Supported employment was so easy back then. I'm like, this stuff is cake. I just had to walk a block. DVR's giving me money for that. I'm just like, crap, this is awesome. So he started, worked his way through, but eventually he didn't get to chef. Okay? So he, you know, ended up marrying his sweetheart, Betty, and, you know, by then I had moved on, and we kept in touch because eventually we were more like peers or friends, you know. I mean, Christmas cards, and if I was up in northern Wyoming, I'd swing by. You know, he'd moved back over to Cody, Wyoming, and I'd swing by and see he and Betty, and, you know, I mean, they were more friends than whatever because I just facilitated something. But lost track with him, but the last time I did visit with him, he had retired very well after selling off 2 KFC franchises. So, $1.80 an hour to a very successful retirement. Now, he had a little help on the way. He married Betty, whose dad happened to own all these franchises in northeastern Wyoming, and as a wedding gift, he gave him 1 KFC. And they parlayed that money into purchasing another one. Another lesson I learned is nobody can do it by themselves. Her dad knew that the both of them wouldn't be able to handle all the responsibilities of owning and operating a franchise, let alone parlaying that money back into buying another one. But he said with the proper supports, they'll be successful. Accounting, businessman, you know. So he knew that it was going to take more than them to do it, but they ran day-to-day operations in terms of all of that. So that's another one of those ripples that hit me and said, you know what? It does take a lot of people. I look around my life and say, who impacted me, and, you know, I mean, who helps make me successful, right? So again, I go back and, you know, selling off I mean, dang, I'd like to retire like they did. But that's the impact. So John had expectations, I had high expectations. Unfortunately, the first environment we met in, there were no expectations. So we had to kind of fumble through this together. But at the end of the day, he got what he wanted. And it wasn't just about owning those restaurants, it was a quality of life. Married a sweetheart, owned their own home, right? Employment doesn't just sit in its own bubble. It's the whole package when we think about a full life experience, you know? So, here's some of my musings that I thought I'd get to. Anybody who wants to work can work. Truly believe that. With the proper supports, expectations and all of that. Like I said, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people, and I've not been smart enough to figure it out for everybody, but I know that there's smart people out there that can. But I've worked with people where nobody had the expectation that they would work. Jim, right? The advancement of somebody like John, or Roger, who started in a day program and just skipped right over everything into working into a highly professional environment, you know? So I truly believe this. Anybody who wants to work can. My lesson is, and it took me a long time to learn this, I can't make anybody work. And believe me, I tried. So my employment agency, we didn't have these big rules and everything, you know, requirements or anything to get in. I told them a couple things when they came. I said, number one is, I'm not going to get you a job. I will support you. I got a job, but I'll support you to get your own job. Number two, I will only work as hard as you do. So all of my employment specialists knew that rule. If you gave it 110%, we're giving it 110%. If you get 50%, probably not the best place to be, because we're going to work with the people that are giving it 110%. If those aren't comfortable for you, we're probably not the employment agency you want. That's pretty easy entrance requirements, I thought. So that's how we operated. Because it took me too long to figure out I can't make somebody work. And I already got a job, right? They got to get their own job. There isn't a problem with the system. The system may actually be the problem. I'm sorry for all of those that work in the system. But I'm not sure that our system has evolved quick enough and fast enough to respond to the needs of folks, especially around employment. You know, when you sign up for services someplace and it takes 60 days to get approved, you know, or whatever, you know, all of that stuff, I mean, there is a certain point that your energy and motivation drop. Because all of us, when we want to work, we start looking that day, correct? So we've got to figure something out, you know, in terms of that. The system is not evolving with efforts like Employment First and all of that. We need all of us, you know, this is a movement. This is, you know, this becomes about policy, but it's going to take all of us to do it, okay? We can't silo services and supports. Oh, that's employment, that's residential, whatever. Think about your life and all the things that interact for you to get to work on a daily basis and be successful and happy and bring your whole self to work. You don't compartmentalize, oh, this is work. Oh, this is home, right? It all works together. Health, well-being, all of that stuff. So when we segment services, we're not passing along information that supports person, you know, their whole life, their whole person and stuff. So we've really got to work closer together, because if things aren't going good at home, doesn't that affect your work life? Same as things aren't going well at work, it affects your home life. It's all intertwined. So we've got to look at that. And then I always look at, why is the career development process different for people with disabilities? You know, we do these assessments and all of these different things, and I look at my career and it's just like, my career development was many jobs over many years to figure out what worked for me and what I liked. Some I were successful in, some I weren't, you know what I mean? That's my development, because only through work is to figure out what things you like and don't like and whatever. We can't do that through an assessment and a pencil paper test, or a one-day work experience or job shadowing. Sometimes we just got to jump off and work. And understand, sometimes it's not going to be successful, but at the end of the day, we're going to learn more, the person's going to learn more about themselves. And maybe it's time to let the disruptors disrupt. So for you out there, probably, you know, all of us, but I'm going to say the people that are new into this system, and those of you receiving services and supports, there's a leadership principle out there. And you don't have to be high up in a company or anything else to demonstrate leadership. Leadership comes at all levels. One of the key traits of great leaders is questioning things. Okay? What I encourage you to do as a leader in promoting this social change effort is to question things. Ask why. Why do we do it that way? And if you ever hear the answer, because that's the way we've always done it, you've got a problem. All right? Because that means nothing has been fluid, changing, and evolving with what's going on. So if you hear those words, because this is the way we've always done it, you ask, well, why? I don't know, that's just the way we do it. Well, why? Keep going back, and you got to question that, because those of us that have been around a long time and embedded in systems, that's all we know. To disrupt it, we need new people with new ideas that come in and say, that's silly. Why should we be doing that? And for those of you that experience disability, I want this charge led from you first, because your voices matter more than the professionals or families, because it's your life that's being impacted. And the rest of us want to go on that ride with you. Fair enough? Give me a nod just at your way. Okay. All right. Disrupt. Love that word. So here we go. I'm just going to wrap it up, and we throw around these terms. Choice, self-determination, inclusion, self-direction, community participation, right? All of our plans say that. Our mission statements say, you know, in the organizations. That's all fine and dandy. But I will tell you what. Work, in our culture, I'm talking about the Western culture, you know, the American culture, is, be it right or wrong, We are measured first off by what we do, not who we are. What's the second question somebody asks you when you first meet after they ask your name? What do you do? I struggle with the unacceptably high unemployment rate of people with disabilities on how they answer that in an environment where typically the response that is expected is a job title or job responsibilities. Yet, the highest group that experiences unemployment or underemployment is people with disabilities. How do they answer that question? It's a problem to me. And that's why I've dedicated my career to this. Not necessarily to answer that question, but it's to fully realize these things. And in our culture, see the capital down in the bottom right? It says capital. Employment, again, be it right or wrong, financial capital is important in our lives. I mean, I wish we could just do whatever without money, but at the end of the day, it's money and that financial capital and work that drives all of these other things. If you don't have money, right? I'm going to say, in a general sense, it's not the end-all, be-all. But with more financial capital, you have more choice in where I work, in where I live, in where I recreate, in what I do. If you don't have financial capital, you're relying on a system. Correct? Social capital. Where do most of us build our social capital? We spend more time at work, those of us that work full-time, than we do with our families in most cases. Our biggest social network starts at our places of employment. Have you thought about that? So, if you're living with the same people or working with that same group, and you're not working in the community or taking new jobs, how are you supposed to get social capital like everybody else does? Are you following me why employment is powerful? Because for those of us that keep spouting off these words and putting them into plans and mission statements and all of that stuff, I'm telling you right now, if we're truly going to honor that and support people to reach that, then we got to focus on ways that they can gain capital. Financial and social, and expand those networks so they can increase relationships and network to get new jobs and all of that stuff. That's where I begin to look at saying, we can talk about these things, but at the end of the day, it's capital that's going to help us drive that. And that's where we need to go. So, thank you very much for putting up with that first thing in the morning. So, I'm going to say, have more bacon. And, oh, they put it away? Go in the back and grab the bacon. No, but you guys have a great day. It's a great lineup. And once again, I want to thank Dale, Doug, and the rest of the coalition for having me. So thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.